Welcome to Saturday's Warrior. We've got a very special episode tonight. We are recording with our friends from WooPig Weekly, and to cover the matchup of Week 3, BYU at Arkansas, a rematch of what started out as a fun and exciting competitive matchup last year. It seems that both teams have kind of entered the season playing a couple of cupcake, so to speak. And so there's still a lot of question marks, I think, on both teams. Looking at team stats right now, the way they match up, they're pretty similar. And I think in some ways they might have a lot of similar strengths and weaknesses. So, but there's also been a lot of change from what we've seen from last year. So anybody that went in, think that we're going to see an exact rematch of what played out last year. Obviously, both teams have changed a lot. So I'm really excited to hear what these guys have to say and fill us in on Arkansas. So if you're a BYU fan coming into this, there's a lot to learn here from these guys, and definitely recommend you go check out their stuff. And here I'll actually add the banner here. Go check them out on their channel and get a good sense of who Arkansas is. But anyway, so Caleb, Seth, I'll turn it over to you guys. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, for sure. We don't mind coming on at all. It's great for us as well. Like you mentioned, jumping on, be able to preview this matchup. But yeah, like you said, there's some similarities between, I think, this game from last year and this year. I think a big one for Arkansas when you start comparing the matchups and things of that nature from last year. You've got to look at Arkansas as we have new coordinators on both sides of the ball, new offense coordinator, new co-defensive coordinators, and a lot of turnover, a little bit of system differences. And so I think that's going to be interesting to see as we're continuing to develop that new scheming and new just how we're trying to attack the ball with offense and defense on both sides there.
Awesome. So what so new coordinators, but are they running similar schemes, or should we expect to see a pretty different approach?
So I'll take a little bit of this one here. The offense is similar in certain facets. We've still got our quarterback back from last year, KJ Jefferson. I think there is a slight change in the offensive scheme with Dan Enos compared to our previous coordinator, Kendall Browse. We don't run as much of the option, whether it's RPO plays or just run options. So it's a little bit more of a pro-style spread out of the pistol, a lot more now than it ever used to be. But we still throw the ball quite a bit, run bubble screens, things of that nature. So there's certain aspects of the offense that look similar, but then there's a few differences with some more like power option runs and things like that that weren't there last year. So that'll be a little bit of a change. And then on the defensive side of things have changed a lot for us. So last year and the year prior to that, under Barry Odom, our old defensive coordinator, we ran a lot of a three-line look with a lot of dropped coverages with multiple cornerbacks and safeties and things. So we had a kind of a strange defense there. It worked well for us in certain games. I think a lot of it was just to try to scab the fact that we had pretty poor secondary talent, honestly, just to kind of put it frankly. But now we run a four lineman look on D, kind of a 4-3, a lot more traditional defense under our new coordinators. So been some big changes on defense, especially in comparison to the offense. I think that's where the bigger changes have came into fruition. So we'll see how that shakes out. That'll be something to watch for sure.
So with these new schemes, and you mentioned having a weaker secondary last year, where do you expect to see your strengths and weaknesses on both offense and defense?
So for that, I think looking at it for me defensively, these first two games, like you said, it's been those cupcake games. I've just like to see we've been a lot more aggressive on the defensive side of the ball, just as far as going after the ball, having a more aggressive approach to our defensive scheming with Travis Williams coming in from UCF, being under Gus Malzahn when he was there and at Auburn, and then having Marcus Woodson coming in at Florida State, who had one of the top secondaries last year. Those guys working together as a co-defensive coordinators. I think you see a lot more aggressiveness and a lot of lot more going after the ball on the defensive side of the ball. And then, just on the offensive side with Dan Enos, he's a guy that's been familiar at Arkansas. This is his second stint at Arkansas. He was back, with Arkansas a few years ago under Brett Bielema. And so I think he brings a lot of familiarity with the program, but also he's been really good at setting up and developing quarterbacks. He turned a guy in like we had a few years ago, Brandon Allen, who was just, your average quarterback, had him put up great numbers. And then, when he left Arkansas, he had stints at Alabama where he worked with guys like Jalen Hurts, and has had a stint at Maryland. Tulia Tagovailoa, Tua's younger brother. So, he's been able to work with some very talented quarterbacks, and I think he has brought in some experience that he can help KJ kind of just grow in the aspect of a passer, because we all know he can run the ball just as good as anyone.
Yeah, speaking of KJ, I mean, this guy, he can throw it. He's a very good quarterback. As you mentioned, he's mobile, and he is built like a truck. I remember in the game last year, BYU, it was a third down, third and long, and he dropped back, and BYU just swarmed him, had like 4 guys on top of him. Somehow he peels out of it, manages to make the throw, which ends up, I'm pretty sure, in a touchdown. So what should have, been a sack and been taking him out of field goal range turned into a touchdown. I mean, he's just hard to stop. So what have teams done in the past to successfully, or to at least slow him down? Because you're not going to stop him, but what have they done to slow Jefferson down?
I think one of the main things I've seen people do that have at least a little success on it is dedicate a linebacker spy, because he does have a lot of plays that if there's good coverage downfield, I mean, he is kind of known to take off if the pocket collapses a little bit and there's good coverage, he'll just take off. So there's been a couple of games where he hasn't gotten as many yards on some of those breakdown plays like that because the other team was running a linebacker spy on him. Granted, the first 2 games so far this year, he's broken a lot of tackles, so it is hard to bring him down. He's a big boy. He's 6'4", 250 nearly. So you guys got a big quarterback too. We did a little bit of a preview show the other day. Y'all got a transfer in there that's almost just as big as KJ. So that's something we're going to be watching for from our standpoint.
Yeah, it's funny. Not nearly as mobile though. He'd never had a rushing touchdown prior to the season. Now he's got 3 already in the first 2 games. So I don't know if that was by design or that's just the looks that were available. Another key player you guys have is Rocket Sanders, and he is out, if I understand correctly, for this game. Is that correct? So how is that going to impact the team? Obviously, losing a big talent always is never a good thing, but what kind of changes could we expect to see from the offense?
So I think with Rocket being out, it's one of those things where I think he's a key piece of this offense, and we saw it last week really trying to operate and find somebody to step up to replace him. I mean, just looking at this matchup from last year, he had 175 yards rushing, and it's hard to just really take him out and plug somebody in that's going to be able to just do the same thing. I know after game 1, Pittman's mentioned he's had some, swelling in his knee, so that's something. I'd rather keep him out until we get to conference play, let him, fully heal. But I think where this is really going to be good for Arkansas is really letting us explore the running back room depth that we have. We have several guys in this room that have, a guy like Dominic Johnson 2 years ago was a starter late into the season. We've got a talented freshman in Rashad Dubinion that played a lot of snaps last year, a guy like AJ Green that's been in the program for 2 years and, is really a bit of a smaller speed back, can catch those passes out of the backfield and also kind of more shiftier, break the edge kind of type plays. And so I think it's really just finding out who's going to be able to step up and fill that void that Rocket leaves behind with him not being in this game. Is there anything you want to add there, Seth?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit there. I mean, last week Rocket was out against Kent State for us as well. And we had AJ Green is definitely kind of our number 2 guy. If you want to call somebody that, I think he had 15 carries last week. And then Rashad Dubinion followed up with 10 more carries of his own. So a little bit of a split there. I think Dominique Johnson had a couple of carries, nothing crazy. But you're probably mainly going to see AJ Green and Rashad Dominion share most of the workload with potential goal line touches by Dominique Johnson. He's one of our bigger backs. And we do have a freshman, I think his name's Isaiah Augustive, who got a few snaps in game one, but not any in our second game. So he may touch the field some, just depending on if we need that added depth there. But I would expect us to probably kind of lean a little bit more on the pass game in this matchup. But I know we've been trying to get our run game going. That's been kind of the area that we've struggled so far this year, surprisingly. And we've had a little bit of weak offensive line play. So I know the coaching staff is really trying to get our run game going and clicking on all cylinders. So there may be a few more called runs than maybe I'm expecting.
Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting. That was my next question was, should we expect the offense to be a little more pass heavy? Because I know to this point, both teams have not really gotten a lot of yards on the ground. And I don't know if, BYU, our OC was saying, well, that's just because they were loading the box and we were just taking what was given to us. That wasn't really by design, but it appears we have had some struggles with running. Do you think that's the case, or do you think we could see a more even attack from you guys?
So for that, I really think you can look at it two different ways. Like we had a scenario, like you just mentioned, game one against Western Carolina, we had them lining up, 8-9 guys in the box consistently, really forcing us to beat them with KJ in his arm. And, after the game, that's really what their head coach came out and said, that they really wanted to force, if we were going to beat them, do it with the air, forcing KJ to pass the ball. And, that's what we did. And then Kent State, we didn't necessarily see as many guys in the box, but I think we're just really trying to find our groove as far as offensive line play goes, taking the right blocking angles, getting the right lineup of guys out there. I think we had, one of our starters out game one, I think possibly last week, that he's going to be back this week. So, Pittman is, he's known for being an offensive line coach. So I don't think you're going to see consistently bad offensive line play. He's going to fix it somehow. And I know press conferences, I think today he said he's felt good about practice this week, that, the energy's been up, the morale's been up, guys are kind of really wanting to get back on track, especially last year. Arkansas was really known as a run heavy team with Rocket and, him putting up over 1,500 yards. So I think that's what he really wants to get back to.
Okay. And so in terms of, actually, let's switch gears. Well, actually, before I do switch gears, is there anybody else on offense, any other key players that we should keep an eye on?
Yeah, I'll throw a couple out for you on our receivers and tight ends. We've got a freshman tight end. His name's Luke Haas. He's very, very, very talented for a freshman. He's already kind of ahead of the curve from a freshman standpoint, especially in that tight end role. He does a really good job run blocking, more so than most freshman tight end do, but he really shines in the pass game. He's got potential. I don't know if any of you guys remember Hunter Henry. I don't know how familiar that name is to BYU fans, but he's probably the best tight end that's ever come through Arkansas, and Luke Haas is already getting comparisons to Hunter Henry. He's really, really talented player. So he'll be somebody to watch for on the offensive side of things. And then a couple of wide receivers. You got Isaac Tesla, who's a transfer that came in, who's really been lighting it up. And then Andrew Armstrong is probably KJ's number one receiver as far as just targets. So those three guys would be names I would mention to watch for.
Great. Yeah, it's always a good sign when you're being compared to a school legend, especially your freshman year. So, okay. And then on the other side of the ball, on defense, what can we expect or are there any players in particular that we should be watching out for?
I think when you look at the defensive side of the ball, the guy that comes to mind to me, I told, in our show this week, we talked about him, Jim out of the portal for us has been linebacker Jaheim Thomas. He's a guy that transferred over from Cincinnati, was a starter, played a decent amount of snaps for Cincinnati last year, has came over, and, 2 games into the season, he's already got 20 total tackles for the year in just 2 games. So he's a guy that brings experience not only from just being an upperclassman, but also being on a Cincinnati team that's had success, made it to those playoff games. So he really knows the mentality that it takes. And then another guy that, we've talked about all offseason for us was our defensive edge, Landon Jackson. He's a guy that from last season to the beginning of the year, this year, bulked up and put on 40 pounds of weight from last year, end of last season to start of fall camp. He's a guy that, like we've mentioned this week, hasn't necessarily put up a ton of numbers in the official recorded stats column, but there's a lot of the intangibles that really affect the opposing team's offense, whether it be getting pressure on the quarterback, rushing some throws, and things of that nature. And then another guy to look out for us is he's been working his way, came in to fall camp late, is one of our defensive backs, Jaheim Singletary. He was a 5-star recruit that redshirted at Georgia, transferred out, was looking for some more playing time, came into Arkansas late August, mid to late August during fall camp, and had really shot up the depth chart and was a starter game one. So I think those are a few guys that from our perspective to look for. Is there anybody else you want to add there, Seth?
Yeah, we've got a really good linebacker, Chris Paul Jr. He's a returner from last year. We had some really solid linebackers that ended up leaving that you're not going to see on the field. Two of those guys, Bumper Pool was one of them. You guys might remember that name. And then can't remember his name from Alabama. Drew Sanders. Yeah, Drew Sanders was the other one that really kind of led the team from our linebacker position last year. Chris Paul Jr. was on the team then as well and played the majority of the games. And he's kind of stepped into that leadership role, kind of directing the defense. That makes sense. So he's another guy to watch for. He's had a pretty good year so far, 10 total tackles and a sack. And he did actually have to sit out the first half of our last game from a targeting penalty from game one. So he's just kind of getting going, but he's another really, really solid player.
Too bad it won't be the first half of this game. So if I would have had any say in it, but okay, well, great. What about, not to overlook the third phase of football, your special teams? Is there anybody of note or any particular strengths or weaknesses we should be mindful of?
I think when you look at special teams, you've got Cam Little, our kicker, that for the most part, it's automatic when it comes to PATs and field goals, really consistent, has really been a guy that we've leaned on heavily in some situations a few years ago. One that comes to mind is 2 years ago, we went down to LSU in Death Valley, and he walked it off with a game-winning field goal, really clutch player. And then on the flip side of that, a guy that is really stepped up this year and is kind of our main return guy, both for punts and kickoff returns, is Isaiah Centennial. He's a local kid from Fayetteville High School, but he's a dual athlete. He runs track at Arkansas as well, so he's got that electric track speed. Really reminds me of a guy that we had several years ago named Joe Adams that was notorious for big punt returns, big kickoff returns, and I think he's a guy that we've mentioned time in and time again that I think it's a matter of time before he just breaks off a big return and takes one to the house.
Okay. Well, something to keep an eye on then. So flipping it a little bit in terms of, you said you did a deep dive, looked at BYU a bit. So in what you saw and in your research, what from an Arkansas perspective from BYU has you guys concerned or worried at all? I hope there's something.
I think your quarterback, honestly, is going to be a new face for us, somebody that we didn't play last year when we had this BYU matchup. I think that's going to be a little bit of a wrinkle just with his size. Very similar to, what our defenders see in practice every day going up against KJ. So maybe that gives us a little bit of an advantage. We face somebody like that in practice all the time. But then I think you guys have a fairly solid wide receiver. That's a big body wide receiver. Chase Roberts, 6'4", 210. Looks like a pretty consistent target that Keaton likes to go to. So he's the one person that really stuck out on the depth chart to me that's got SEC type size that we haven't really faced yet this year from a wide receiver position. So he's one of the guys that really gives me a little bit of concern that he's going to be able to box out some of our defensive backs on slant routes or things of that nature. So that'll be one person that I'm hoping we can kind of lock up.
Yeah, well, speaking of wide receivers, unfortunately, Puka Nacua will not be coming out those doors. I know that you guys are probably familiar with him from the game from last year. Now the rest of America is familiar with him after one game at the NFL. He kind of stood out in week 1, but as a rookie, but filling in for Cooper Kupp. But so this is not, I like to go back and watch like the condensed highlights, like the 20-30 minute, version of games. And this is not one I'd revisited because it was a little bit painful. And as I was doing it, I actually enjoyed it quite a bit because, I mean, yes, we lost, but there were a lot of great plays that BYU had there. And, in the beginning of the game, it was still competitive. BYU led for some time early, and there were just some great throws and some tremendous catches. But so yeah, Nakua won't be there. Cody Epps has missed the first 2 games. I don't know if he is planning on coming back or not. He also had a big game last time around. You mentioned Roberts. We have a couple others. We have Lassiter, who is a transfer from Eastern Michigan, and he's been one that's been relied on pretty heavily. And then also Keanu Hill, who's returning from injury, and is another key piece. So hopefully we'll have them and all healthy and ready to go. But do you feel like there's a chance to take advantage of the secondary there? You mentioned that as being having been a weak spot. I know you guys have done a lot to try to shore that up, but do you think there's a chance to kind of attack from the air?
So I think this is going to be a really good test for Arkansas. Pittman really, after the season last year, went out and addressed, that was our weak point, went out and addressed that. He got several, transfer guys that were starters at other schools. We got a couple from Baylor, one from TCU, guys like that have experience, and, went out and got James Singletary from Georgia, a guy that was extremely talented, but, just was, piled down the depth chart behind, the depth that Georgia had. And then also we got some, good recruits that came in that were highly touted recruits that Sam Pittman was like, pretty much in my head, if I was in that conversation, being like, look, you have a chance to come here and play pretty quickly with, the guys that we lost out of the transfer that decided to transfer out, and guys that, left. And then on top of that, you got some returning guys like Dwight McGlothern, Hudson Clark that have been in this program. So I think you've got a good mixture in this secondary. So I think I'm interested to see, this will be a good test for our secondary to see, we had success against these 2 smaller schools, but what are we going to do now against a team that brings more of that typical size that you'll see in the SEC? And another guy that, I think we didn't mention a while ago was y'all's tight end Isaac Rex. He's a big guy, 6'6", 255. So I think that's going to be more of what you're going to see in the SEC. So, it'll be a really good test for these guys to, play that higher level competition and really see what they're made of in the secondary, especially with the new coaching changes and new schemes that we're running as well.
Yeah. Isaac Rex, yeah, and he's supposed to be fully healthy this year. He was still playing with pins and things in his ankle last year, and so all that's out, and he's supposed to be fully recovered. So hopefully that stays that way, and he's able to stay healthy and be out there and a contributor. On defense, what do you think BYU's best shot is to cause havoc? And don't worry, coaching staff isn't watching this show, so you're not giving any advice to the opponent.
Fair enough. I think the one thing that I think could really hinder us is if you're able to bottle up the run. Obviously, I think KJ is going to have success through the air, so if you can mitigate that enough, fine. But I think if you can hinder the run game, that's where we started out really, really slow in game 2 against Kent State. We had I think it was 2, maybe 3 and outs in our first couple of possessions of that game. Our defense actually scored our first touchdown in week 2 for us. So a lot of that was because we couldn't run the ball well. We were getting behind the chains, had a couple of pre-snap penalties, and just couldn't get drives going. So that would really be, I think, where it will start. If BYU is going to have success against us from a defensive standpoint, I think you're going to have to come in and basically assert that you're going to stop the run early. That could kind of throw things for a loop for us early. And then after that is if you've got good good coverage in the secondary, I think that's going to make our life harder too.
Yeah, secondary's going to be interesting because we had a couple key injuries there, and they've held up pretty well so far. But again, yeah, we have not gone up against the athletes that your team will have, and that's one thing. Is obviously being an SEC team, you'll definitely have more and deeper pool of talent and athletes to pull from, and so I think BYU to do this and pull out the win is just going to have to out scheme, but also not beat ourselves, and just it's a lot of those little things, and it's just going to really have to be about outperforming and and winning kind of on the margins there, because if it's just if it gets into another shootout and we're just relying on athleticism at that point, I don't think at the end of the day BYU will be able to keep up. I mean, I think the top of our depth chart is right there with a lot of teams and can compete. But the depth, I think, is still something that we're continuing to build. And I think we'll be able to now that we're in the Big 12, and that's going to continue to improve. But so it should be interesting. So Arkansas has a big game in week 4 at LSU. Is that right? So is there any chance that they think we took care of business against Provo in Utah last year? And we got this bigger matchup that they get caught looking ahead. Is there any chance?
100%.
Okay.
I think that's definitely a possibility. I'm hoping that the coaches don't allow that to happen, if that makes sense. But I actually kind of think that almost happened in week 2 for us, where we weren't really too worried about Kent State. They had just been down at UCF and had given up like almost 800 yards of offense. I think we kind of looked past them a little bit, and we're looking towards BYU potentially, and then also probably towards the LSU game. And I think Kent State kind of caught us sleeping in at least the first half of last week's game. It took us after halftime to really start clicking on all cylinders. Finally kind of got things going. I think our defense played well the whole game, but our offense really struggled in the first half. So there's definitely a potential of that happening with LSU's game being such a big matchup the week after this. But hoping the coaches put the fear of God in them.
Yeah, I mean, following up what you said there, Seth, with after this game last week, and I think I saw something about Pittman's post-game press conference, or his talk to the team was basically, yeah, we won, but we didn't look good doing this. So I could see there's a chance we look ahead, but also with the way the game went last week, I really think Pittman's going to hit on these guys on we've really got to be focused this game. We've got to get back to what Arkansas does, which, like we mentioned, the struggles with the run. I think that's why you potentially could see a heavy dose of trying to really force the run to get started at the beginning of the game. But yeah, if I'm Pittman, I think I've got to get these guys really locked in. We can't, be looking ahead, even though it is a big matchup. It was announced earlier this week that it's going to be on primetime, 6:00 ESPN at night. So Death Valley at night is always a big, highly televised watched game. But, if you're these guys and, didn't really enjoy the performance you had last week, I'm getting locked in for this week.
Yeah, well, and for BYU, I mean, on most years, during independence, this would be one of the key, marquee matchups of our entire season. And I don't see any way that BYU could overlook Arkansas based on what happened last year, and it's an SEC team. However, where I think we're so excited, if it does happen at all, and maybe this is more the fans and not as much the players, we're so excited to be in the Big 12 that we might just be looking for Big 12 play. We're talking about all these Big 12 teams and haven't focused as much as on out of conference play. But so that's the only way I could see it happening. But I don't think that's really the way the players are looking at it, hopefully, because it's gonna be quite the matchup. So what is finally, what is your guys' prediction for the game on Saturday?
You want scores?
Yeah, more or less. If you think high scoring, low scoring, I'm sure you guys are picking Arkansas to win, but how do you think it's going to play out?
I'll throw mine out first. I think it's actually going to be a little bit lower scoring than maybe some people anticipate. I've seen some stuff online where I think the over under is like 50 something points. Let me find that really fast.
It's currently set at 47
47 and a half. Yeah, 47 and a half. So right at about 50 points. I don't know why I've got a gut feeling that I'm not sure that's going to happen. I think it's going to be a kind of a 21-17 kind of game. I don't know why, but I think both offenses may struggle a little bit early on. Defense is going to be amped up a little bit. I know we've got some kinks to work out in the run game, and I think that's what we're going to try to push early on, and I think that may actually slow us down some potentially. And I think our defense, if they look like they had the last two games, have a good chance at slowing BYU's offense down a good bit. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a couple of stalled out drives early on in the game. But that's kind of my pick, somewhere in that 21-17 range, maybe up to like a 35-21 type game. I'm not sure either team breaks the 40 mark, though.
Yeah, I think I got to follow up and, just echo what Seth said. The spread right now is Arkansas favored by 8. Some I've seen some places have it listed as 9, but I expect that to get a lot closer the closer we get to game day and day of the game. I think it is going to be probably a tight, low scoring affair, especially when you think about something that has, I've noticed for sure this season is the new rule change with the running clock that doesn't stop on first downs. It's definitely shortened the game. Typically as a fan going to the games, I expect at least 4 hours of the game. And, last week, the first home game that I was able to attend with us being back in Fayetteville, the game lasted 2 hours, 45 minutes, and 3 hours. So really shorter than what we're used to. And I think that's resulting in some lower scoring games as well. So I think that's what you're going to see this week.
Okay. All right. Well, we will see. I think that it's certainly going to be a good matchup regardless. And it'll be I think, as I mentioned at the top of the video, both teams have a lot of question marks still. And I don't know if we've learned what we wanted to learn coming out of these first two games. And so just as I watched some of your stuff and as I've read about Arkansas coming into this, it sounded very similar to, I think, how BYU's feeling right now. So it's definitely going to be a game where I think we learn a lot about probably both teams. Well, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I really appreciate you being on. But before we go, I do want for anybody, any BYU fans or any fans that will be visiting Fayetteville, what is a restaurant that they need to try while they're in town? What is your go-to place?
I think right off the top of my head, two really big time Arkansas places is up in Fayetteville. You got the Catfish Hole that, is really big for Arkansas. That's where we, Coach holds his weekly live radio show. Really good food, really good catfish, hush puppies, the works, everything. And then you got to look at Wright's Barbecue. They're one of the best, barbecue places in Northwest Arkansas. Seth, you got any other places to recommend?
Yeah, I'll throw another one out there for you. Sassy's Red House is a Fayetteville favorite for sure. It's barbecue, things like that. It's phenomenal. There's a lot of radio shows that take place at Sassy's also, so it's a pretty famous spot in Fayetteville. And then obviously, if you're staying the night down there and looking to have a late night good time, go to Dixon Street. It's one of the more popular college streets in the country. Tons of good places to get a beverage. And some good food down there as well. JJ's, Grubs, lots of places like that. So check it out. Have a good time in the town.
All right. That late night scene sounds like maybe less appealing to some of the BYU fans, but the barbecue is definitely appealing. All right, do you guys eat pig barbecue, like pork barbecue? Is that allowed there? Even okay, that's not a
feels like it shouldn't be, but we love it,
right.
man.
Okay, because we don't eat cougars, so that's just checking. So anyway, and I should have actually done this at the top of the video, but quickly, I'd like to you guys to tell me a little bit about your show and put in your plugs, where we can find you and all your content.
Yeah, so we got started up about a year ago. I got, or maybe 6 months ago, middle of football season last year, got this up and running. Really wanting to do something and just share knowledge of Razorback fandom, and then pulled my buddy Seth on board here, and he's been with me for a majority of our episodes, and we've been doing this for about 6 months now. Did our first live broadcast last week. We're part of the Variety Sports Network that they brought us on. They've got several shows that cover NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, several college shows on top of that. I'm also part of we do a college football show that's Saturday Showdown that we do go live on Thursdays. So you can find us on Twitter, the X, whatever you want to call it, at Woopig Weekly. We, tweet out all of our episodes, links, news updates, whatever Arkansas news there is to let people know. Anything to add there, Seth?
Yeah, we're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, both pretty much anywhere you can find podcasts. We've recently started doing YouTube. Got a YouTube channel going. We like to do player interviews. We've had some interviews with a lot of ex-players, current players, some old coaches. Coach Houston Nutt, if that name sounds familiar. We had him on the show. That was a really cool interview for us. So a lot of those shows are on YouTube, and we're trying to get some more of our old episodes kind of uploaded to YouTube as well. So if there's any Hog fans out there in the BYU area that are listening, y'all give us a look.
Well, awesome. Yeah, certainly. Again, if you're a BYU fan joining us, go check out their stuff and get familiar with Arkansas before the game. And anybody else on here, if you just love good college football content, go check out our guys, and I'll include all their information, Twitter, everything in the comments down below. So go check them out. And again, thanks, Caleb, Seth, so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. This was really great stuff.
Thanks for having us, man.
All right.
For sure.